So I think everybody's here now and starting to connect. So many bright minds. That's wonderful. So welcome all of you to this, actually our first virtual panel discussion. Today we will have a discussion about diversity, a topic which is an integral part of the mission of Fulbright Austria since the beginning, actually. But things change over time, so it's important to stay up to date and learn from everybody what diversity is and what the impressions and the ideas people have in their minds are. So it's great that we have today this opportunity to meet with all of you and have this discussion. First of all, the idea and the start initiation, so to say, for this project came from Dara and Doné, who came to my office and said, yeah, we would like to have this panel discussion on a virtual level. So this idea was well taken. So we started to organize it, and it took us a long time, but now we are here in the beginning of 2021 to start with this. And then we were thinking about who would be a great moderator, who would be great moderators for these panel discussions. And our board came to our mind. So we are so grateful that our board members, Miranda Patterson and Roberta Maierhofer, joined the idea of having this panel discussion and agreed to moderate today. So with this, I would like to introduce Miranda Patterson. She is the current cultural attaché here in Vienna, arrived 2020. Before that, you were serving as consular officer at the US Embassy in Islamabad and Mexico City. So we are glad that you're here today and help us to discuss the topic of diversity. So thank you for this. Professor Maierhofer, Roberta Maierhofer, is also a board member actually for a long time, and we are so grateful that she joined us here today too to talk about diversity and facilitate the discussion. She is a professor in American Studies and the director of the Center for Inter-American Studies in Graz. So she's a really busy woman, and we are glad that she found time to join us here, and has a research background which is impressive. Her focus is on American literature, cultural studies, gender studies, transatlantic cooperation in education, and more you will see that she's actually very active in these fields. Actually, I also want to share a small secret, because we are grateful that both of them are here today. So we have prepared a small surprise, which is in the mail as a small thank you token, so to say. And we are really grateful for all the panel members here today, which are actually the brain power of the entire discussion. So with this, I want to thank Fulbright families, Fulbridge. I want to thank Fulbright Prism, Fulbright Latinx, Fulbright Salam, Fulbright Lotus, and Fulbright Noir, alumni-led organizations which focus on diversity, and we're grateful that you join us here. With this, I will turn my microphone on mute, because now it's not my time anymore, and I hand over to Roberta and Miranda, please.
Okay, so I will take over. Miranda and I have sort of spoken ahead that I will sort of kick it off, and we will sort of then be in dialogue and sort of ask some questions, and would ask the members of the different alumni associations to then just raise their hand. We want to sort of have a lively discussion, which of course is difficult in this setting, because sometimes you have these awkward pauses, the time taking, the turn taking is sometimes difficult, but I'm sure we'll manage in the sense of what we want to do with Fulbright. And I think Hermann already has mentioned an interesting aspect of this question of diversity in terms of these different organizations. And those of you who've joined this discussion and seen how many different organizations are committed to the Fulbright idea. On the one hand, you have Fulbright as an institution, and then you have former Fulbright participants who say, I want to bring in something very specific. Aha, one of the kids, hi. The next Fulbright generation in the making already. So I think that's really an interesting aspect of diversity, the individual and the collective, the structure of the institution and the different organizations here. So I'll start off and just ask sort of one important thing when one is committed to something, one wants to show it in action, in deeds, not just talk the talk, but also walk the walk. And so the first question that Miranda and I want to ask is, what was your motivation beyond, of course, that Fulbright is wonderful, but what was your motivation to sort of set up this specific, it's a kind of interest group, but at the same time, it is, of course, part of the bigger Fulbright family. So what were your motivations to set up, to found, or to become a part of it and be active in it? And that's sort of the kickoff question here. And we'll see who wants to jump in.
I can start.
Okay.
So, hi everyone, I'm Arwa from Fulbright Salam. And so Isra and I met, she's my co-founder. We met almost 2 years ago here in Vienna. And we kind of started talking, and we also talked about, or we realized during the conversation that me and her actually faced different problems or differences than our cohorts, simply because we were both brown Muslim women in, like, I was in the United States and she's in Austria. And at that time, Fulbright Noir and Fulbright Prism already existed. So we decided to do basically more or less the same with a focus on Muslim Fulbrighters. Because it was really important for us to share the stories of Fulbrighters who identify as Muslims and most of the time can't really, or have a different experience than their own cohort. And ever since, I think since for a year now, we also have another member. Yeah, so we're a team of 3. And yeah, that was kind of our motivation.
Thank you. I already see hands up. Than, I think you were first, and then Tyler. But Pathan, you have to put the microphone on.
I think
yeah.
I think Tyler was first, but
okay.
if she doesn't mind, I can go.
That's one of the difficulty of the virtual space. Sorry, Tyler, but why don't you go ahead? I think it doesn't really matter in the long run. Yeah.
Yeah, I started Fulbright Lotus right after my Fulbright grant in Belgium because I kept calling my friends in America and complaining about being the only like Asian person I knew for like my whole city. I like knew one other Asian person. I was very distraught, and I remember calling and just complaining about it. And then I guess at one point they were like, "Why don't you do something?" And I remember seeing Fulbright Noir start their own platform, and that really inspired me to really like step up. And because I just thought, you know, if I feel this lonely and alienated and depersonalized, there has to be other people who feel the same way. And I just remember being in my city, and I remember having to explain, you know, what it was to be American to people, and then feeling like an imposter because I'm Vietnamese American, but I don't do things like celebrate Christmas. And people were asking about Thanksgiving, which I don't celebrate. And then I just felt like they had this impression of America as a very, you know, white center place. And I really thought to myself that, you know, Fulbright is about sharing the American experience. If it's about diplomacy and interaction, it has to have a goal of representing America completely and holistically. And that can't be accomplished unless you represent the different groups that live within America. And so I thought, you know, if our goal is to promote, you know, the American culture, Asian Americans are part of that culture. We have to promote those identities as well and those narratives, because if we don't, then, you know, we just go around having people think that American are just like people who live in New York on the television set of Friends or something.
Okay, thank you. Now I know Tyler was next. So please, Tyler.
Hi, my name is Tyler, and I am on the Fulbright Noir board. I'm the event planning coordinator. And my motivation for joining the board was because I was longing for a sense of community, and a community that was of Black people. I grew up in a very multicultural city in New York City. However, that doesn't necessarily mean there were lots of Black people around still. You know, so at school, I was one of two, or in this setting, I was one of three. And, you know, the last few years of my life, I've really just been wanting to join a community where I could help other Black people, right? And so whether that's personally or professionally, and when I found out about Fulbright Noir, and the inspiration being because, yes, like Black people have a very unique experience as Black cultural ambassadors because of interpersonal racism, but also institutional racism. And I really wanted to help make the Fulbright experience a better experience for Black grantees.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I'm not quite sure if Michaela or Michaela was first, so do you know? Okay. One of you, Michaela, perhaps you, because you're on my left-hand side. And yeah.
You want me to go first, Miley? Okay, I can jump in first. Thanks for having me. So I am one of the co-founders of Fulbright Prism with Tim Sensenig and Laura Steinecke. And for me, the roots of wanting to start something like this happened on my first day in the classroom. I was an English teaching assistant in Hamburg, Germany. And on the very first day of classes, when I was introduced to my students, of course, there was a small Q&A opportunity. And some of the very first questions actually in every single one of my classes was, do you have a boyfriend? And I did not know how to answer that question because I did not. I had a girlfriend at the time. And it was really my first post-college working experience that this had even come up. And I was not sure how to answer and what would be culturally appropriate. I didn't want to offend anybody. And so I didn't know what to do with that information. And so I turned to some of my queer Fulbrighter friends, such as Tim and Laura, and we started having conversations about what Fulbright had and had not prepared us for in terms of a classroom experience and how our identities would play into that. And we also realized that our experience in a large German city is going to be really different from somebody doing a Fulbright in Russia, for instance. So we thought that it made sense to try to collect a lot of stories of other LGBTQ people who had done Fulbrights, who had lived in different environments, and who had also come from different environments in the States. So that was kind of the inspiration for Prism. And then when we saw that what Fulbright Noir was doing on social media, we said, that's the direction we should go with this. And that's how we started.
Okay, now Miley, it's your turn.
Yeah, hi, my name is Miley. I am on the board and I am the social media coordinator for Fulbridge. I was not really involved in the founding of Fulbridge, but Fulbridge was founded in 2015, and our founder, Zoe Joya, was she was an English teaching assistant in South Korea in 2015, and when she was visiting some friends in Southeast Asia, she met some other Fulbrighters by chance, and she thought it was an amazing opportunity to learn about different grants while interacting with different cultures. And so the founding impetus of Fulbridge really was to connect Fulbrighters and really focusing on like the educational aspect of international exchange and sort of sharing our diverse experiences. But I feel like I should also clarify moving forward that technically Fulbridge, we are not an affinity group. We are not focused on any particular identity, but we do collaborate pretty frequently with the rest of the team. So that's all I have to say about that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Valerie, I think you're next.
Hi, everybody. So I founded Fulbright Families when I became an alumni ambassador. So when you get back from your Fulbright grant period, you can apply to be an alumni ambassador. And so I did. And during the orientation, I was really inspired by Fulbright Noir founders, and Fulbright Latinx started, I think, in that same year, Fulbright Prism. I just felt when I was going through the application process, it was hard to find people who had taken their families with them. And I was going just with my son, who was 5. And so you have like all these fears that kind of surround like not only your own fears too, like your family's fears. So that was the inspiration for the group.
Thank you. Genesis, I think it's your turn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Genesis. I'm not a co-founder of Fulbright Latinx, but I am part of the board. And like many people have already said, Fulbright Latinx was certainly inspired by Fulbright Noir. And I just want to take a moment to just highlight the fact that the leadership that Fulbright Noir has put forth, and that there's constantly leadership being put forth by Black communities in so many different ways. So just want to take a moment to acknowledge that there's so much that Fulbright Noir has inspired so many other groups to do. So Fulbright Latinx was inspired by what Fulbright Noir had already started doing. And I think for the co-founders, Vanessa and Elena, who are also alumni ambassadors, there was just a need to see ourselves represented. And the Latinx community is such a complex and diverse community. So really, how is it possible that even within the diversity that the Latinx community has, we still don't see ourselves reflected in the in what we were seeing within Fulbright? So Fulbright Latinx formed for that reason, to build community as well. And I think I personally joined the board because similar to what Michaela said, you know, I had a very unique experience identifying as Latinx in a very small town in the north of Portugal. A lot of questions similar to what Tan said about being questioned about am I from America, but you don't quote unquote look American, and all of these sort of sometimes uncomfortable situations where you don't know who to turn to. You don't know, hey, have you experienced this before? And so being able to have a group where you can turn to and say, actually, yes, here are the resources I use to help me get through something like that. I wanted to be a part of creating that for the Latinx community. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we've made the round, everyone here. Yes, okay. And before I hand over to Miranda to take on some of the other questions, one question now will be, which not each of you have to answer, but perhaps would want to, what is this Fulbright Diversity Collective? Because of course, you're representing individual approaches, individual aspects. What would be now this diversity collective to you? Anyone, any thoughts on this? Perhaps I should reword it then. What would be a gain or an advantage of sort of having a group of sort of an umbrella aspect for these individual needs and individual approaches and this representation, but not just the representation, because you talked about the community, the specific community that you're building, and where would there be an advantage of having a sort of an umbrella association, or this, and where would you perhaps sort of see that it's not so necessary to have this diversity collective?
I can jump in, and everyone feel free to join, please. I'm sure I'll leave something out. So there are a few reasons why I think it's beneficial for all of us to work together. The first thing that comes to mind is that we are very collaborative. I know that we've, for instance, supported each other's events on social media. We cross-advertise, we host things together. And I think that's important because people can hold multiple identities and be part of multiple groups. And so that's certainly one aspect of why we have this collective. And I think another aspect of it is, you know, in some ways, we try to push the Fulbright program to be better, to be more inclusive. And there is more power to do that when there are more people involved in that process and more identities represented. So those are the two big reasons that pop into my head. I don't know if others have other things to add, but I think collaboration, cooperation, and then, you know, working towards some common goals to push Fulbright in the right direction.
Good.
Thanks for that, Michaela. I totally agree. And I would also add that we also kind of understand each other. Like, we come from a place where we kind of face the same struggles, but different. So sometimes when we talk about something, you don't really have to explain yourself. And, you know, it's just, yeah, they kind of get it. And I think to have that collective with different identities or with multiple identities, not just different, that helps a lot. And it just like takes away so much that you usually have to explain. And yeah, I'm totally grateful for that.
Okay, good. We can come back to some of the questions if you want to add at different spaces. So it should be an open discussion. And I'm happy to now hand over to Miranda for the next lead into some of the issues we want to talk about today.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for sharing that. It really sort of resonated with me as a Black woman, foreign service officer with the State Department. I've experienced some of the similar issues even when I was abroad for the first time during college, and even sort of on the visa line. I know Hermann had mentioned my time in Mexico, and I, you know, interviewed 100+ Mexicans every day for visas to go to the U.S. And once or twice, someone would say, you know, "Are you American? Like, can I speak to a real American?" And you know, that happens a lot with my colleagues all over the world. And so I really commend you all for seeing an issue that was happening with you and actually, you know, doing something about it and finding other people that look like you and, you know, are going through the same things. Because I really think that support system is so, so important when you're not, you know, at home in the US around your people or, you know, whatever that may be. And a lot of you guys, you all mentioned sort of Fulbright Noir sort of being one of the first affinity groups that was founded. So I was just wondering, Tyler, if you could just speak about maybe how some of those early days were, and maybe some of the challenges you guys faced in, you know, getting momentum, and if you have suggestions for other people in a similar situation who might want to start a group of similar people of similar backgrounds, similar interests, and what they might do.
Hi. So I just joined the board a couple of months ago. So I wasn't there when our founding mothers founded it. But I will say during the transition meeting, it was really emphasized that everyone be clear about their goals and their intentions and what their values are, right? Because in the process, you don't want to lose yourself, right? So in the process of, you know, ensuring that Black grantees have a better Fulbright experience and they're supported and this, that, and the third, you don't want to lose who you are. And our board has there are 8 of us, you know, and so there are a lot of different ideas, right? And we all have different experiences, but you really have to sit down and say, okay, this is non-negotiable for me. This is non-negotiable for me. And this is what our founding mothers created. And this is what is non-negotiable for them. And just maintaining that and doing so with integrity. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
It does. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot because you weren't one of the founding mothers, but I think that that's important just to, when you start any sort of organization, to actually have, I guess, not goals, but just sort of an ethos of, you know, this is what we believe in, and these are our beliefs, and we're going to stick to these. And it kind of helps as a guide for, you know, years down the line when there's a whole group of new people who, you know, weren't there in the beginning, but they have something to go back to reference. So yeah. My next question was going to be, and anyone can sort of jump in to answer this. If you maybe can talk a little bit about what type of sort of, I guess, what type of diversity related issues you encountered during your Fulbright experience, and how, other than starting an affinity group, how you might have combated that. This is sort of just a look back into your experience and what you faced.
I'll just go. I remember the person who was before me on my Fulbright grant was like this all-American man from Alabama named Trey, and everyone loved him. And he was so great. And he, like, for Thanksgiving, I guess, like, just was so good at explaining everything, like all the traditional things that people expected. And then I come along the scene and I'm just like, I can't do any of those things, you guys. I'm so sorry. And I remember just like having a problem of just like, how do I want my students to view me, right? And what is my role as a cultural ambassador? Is my role as a cultural ambassador to represent the American image the way that people see America? Or is my role as a cultural ambassador to also share my story as well and say that that story is also a valid narrative, even if it's a marginal narrative? And the thing I did was that in my presentation on American history, culture, and politics, which is a lot of things in one presentation that is only an hour long, I started off by centering myself. That I talked about where I was from. And then from that, I kind of talked about my family's migration history, my community, and I kind of spun it into this idea that, you know, even though my marginal story is so marginal, it's thematic. It's a part of a history of America as a migration place. It's a history of America as a place where people come to. And in that way, I can still represent these certain themes and ideals and values, but I don't have to play into one specific narrative. I can still be very true to who I am and say that that represents my country.
Absolutely, I agree. Valerie, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I did my grant in South Korea, and I am still currently living in South Korea. And because I'm Asian, I don't really experience the same like day-to-day sort of issues on like racial diversity, other than many people being very surprised and disappointed that I don't speak fluent Korean. But as a queer person and a non-binary person, I've had to like mentally adapt to being misgendered pretty daily, and that like having my identity sort of not really recognized or accepted by my coworkers or my students, and that has been somewhat difficult to adapt to. But Korea is a pretty racially homogenous country, so I'm really, really big on anti-bias education and like racial justice education in my classroom, and trying to have these, I think as a Fulbrighter, I came into my English teaching experience with like these really grand ideas about what I was going to teach about like racism and sexism and ableism and things like that. But I've had to somewhat sort of adjust my expectations, because I've observed somewhat of an ignorance towards diversity, because everyone here mostly is Korean. And I've had many students like say racism isn't really a problem here because we're all Korean, and that attitude I've observed is completely false, because there are of course other ethnicities here. And for me in the classroom, it was about adapting the conversation into a way that my students can understand. So instead of focusing solely on like racial issues, which is not something that came easily to them, especially in a foreign language, which is something that is also really important in anti-bias education, is that we as educators are going into countries where the cultures are not our own. And so like trying to force our perceptions of racism and sexism as like in American context can sometimes do more harm than good in like our classrooms where our students don't speak fluent English. We're there to teach them English. So how I adapted those conversations was mostly using physical sort of diversity. Like in my school, there were students who were using wheelchairs. And so I was able to communicate with my students, oh, so you see how these students are struggling. There are students that are struggling in different ways. And like, how are they struggling? How does our society accommodate them? How do we not accommodate them? What can we do to include them in like conversations and things like that? And so that's mostly how I've tried to address diversity related issues in my classroom, at least.
I love those good teaching moments. I know Michaela had said something earlier about someone just assuming, you know, who her partner was. And, you know, sometimes those conversations are hard to have, but I love a good teaching moment. But it can be hard, like you said, when there's a language barrier, and sometimes when you try and explain something, it can do more harm than good. But I'm glad that you're finding ways to get around that. Arua, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I think I'm one of the very few on the board that actually went to the United States, if not the only one. And for me, I have to admit that it was a little bit easier because I had the advantage that most of the people don't even know what Austria is. So they don't really have a picture of how Austrians look like. So that was actually a great advantage. So when I said I would speak German, based on the cultural or like the multicultural experience that they know in the United States, it wasn't really something that, you know, that didn't fit into their mind. So I didn't really struggle on that term. It was more like other racist encounters that made it a little bit harder, but not in the class context or someone not understanding how I can be Austrian or and Muslim, etc. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Where in the US were you, Arua?
I was in Ohio, in Bowling Green. So in Bowling Green is like a very small college town. I'm not gonna say it's the most diverse place I've ever seen, but exactly.
Oh, before I hand it back over to Roberta, I saw Valerie had her hands up.
So I had to do a lot more managing of people's perspectives in my home because I got placed on the Islamic faculty in Sarajevo as an English teaching assistant. And I live in El Paso, Texas. There isn't a large Muslim community here. And so I was having to manage everybody's anxieties and fears and just misunderstanding of where I was going and the people I was going to be around. And then when I got in country, it was all, oh, how wonderful that you're able to come here and your husband paid for you to be here. And I was like, well, no, I want a grant and I'm here, you know. And they're like, oh, wonderful. And I had to get a permission letter to travel with my son from his father. So there were these little things that I ran into that I didn't expect. And then also with the Fulbright Families group, what I have seen is I'm having a huge problem finding diverse families to feature on the page. So there's some issues with that in the Fulbright program, and that's part of my goal, is representing and featuring families that kind of encompass the American experience.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. And I'll take over from Miranda. It seems that we're also talking in two levels in terms of some of you as educators, where you're already talking about how you're going to sort of teach that, how your encounters are in the schoolroom. Someone already in the introduction talked about not being prepared for that school setting. And on the other hand, of course, you have that experience as an individual, as a person being in that country. And those might be sort of two levels that we would have to address as well. So some of you have already talked about the next question in your introduction. So I'm going to combine it with something that actually Valerie stated now. The question is, what do you think that you have already achieved with your groups, with your affinity groups? And what would you like to sort of see in the future? So Valerie has already looked into the future in certain ways, but what do you think was important as an achievement, not just on an individual basis, but in terms of your group? And what would you like to sort of move towards? Where's your goal? What would be your next steps? So anyone, Genesis, is that your hand up already? Yes, good. So Genesis, your turn.
Sure, thank you. So we've done a lot of, especially during quarantine, there was a lot of social media events. Shout out to our co-founder, Vanessa, who's single-handedly doing all of our social media stuff. But one of the projects I personally worked on myself was we initiated our first Fulbright Latinx alumni mentorship program. And this was a really wonderful opportunity where we connected. So Fulbright, who self-identified as Latinx, they wanted to volunteer to mentor other either prospective Fulbright applicants, so applicants who identified as Latinx who are applying to the Fulbright program, or grantees who had already been granted an award who identified as Latinx. So we paired these very generous, Latinx mentors who just wanted to help with these prospective applicants or grantees, and sorry if my internet's a little bit slow, but we connected these mentors with their mentees, and just being able to see those relationships, what come out of those relationships, being able to talk about either concerns that applicants or grantees had before going to the host country, specific questions about the host country. So that's a really big thing that I think we're proud of. We got a lot of really great feedback, both from the mentors who volunteered and also the mentees who received mentorship. And I think one event that we actually have coming up in a few weeks is we're going to do a Latinx alumni networking event. I think for us, at least one thing that I think we really value is feedback. And so what our goals are for the future is really incorporating what it is that we're hearing from the community. So the Latinx networking event actually came from the feedback we got from alumni who said, I want to connect with other Fulbright Latinx alumni because once my grant is finished, I actually don't know what to do with my grant. It's like my grant is done and now what? How do I continue to live out my Fulbright grant even though I'm not doing the grant anymore? So we're really excited to host this event in a few weeks where we're going to build a more professional, I guess, community, and Fulbright Latinx alumni can talk to other alumni that are in their field. How did you get in your field? Did your Fulbright grant help you get there? And all those things. So I think our goals are very much based off of what we hear the community wants and what they think they need from us. So, and we do a lot of work trying to gather that feedback constantly, whether that's through surveys or through Instagram polls or things like that. So that's what we've been working on.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure who was first, Michaela or Tyler. Michaela, perhaps you were ignored, I think, beforehand, so you'll get the floor. Yes, the screen.
Okay, thank you. So we have three things kind of sprang to mind in terms of what we've accomplished and things that I'm pretty proud of. The first is that we now have Fulbright Prism chapters, which, as you all know, because you're all involved with Fulbright in some way, it's really hard to create a community with people in different time zones, in different languages, across the globe, right? Because Fulbright really is almost everywhere. So we decided that something that might be useful in terms of on-the-ground community building is creating local chapters. So our first chapter was in Taiwan. We also have one on the west coast of the US, and we have the newest one, which is in Ireland. And there is some interest in maybe starting one in Spain as well. And the reason we decided to go this route is because the three of us who founded Fulbright Prism, it's me, Tim, and Laura, we all did our Fulbright grants in Hamburg, Germany. So we were all located in one city, in one country. We're all white. And so we do not represent the total experiences of all Fulbrighters, and it would be impossible and perhaps even irresponsible to try to create relevant community-based programming and events for communities we've never been to and people we don't know necessarily. So, you know, we are kind of helping manage and we give resources whenever possible, but we thought it made sense for people who are actually in those spaces physically or have been in those spaces to kind of lead that community building initiative. So that's the first thing that we've been doing, and I'm really proud of that. The second thing that we've done, and that's been with the help of the entire coalition that we have here, is we created a survey to gather information from Fulbright grantees, alums, and even employees. And we did that for a few reasons, but basically we tried to ask Fulbright and the US government for some data points, and for several reasons, it was going to take a really long time or they didn't want to give us that information. But we wanted to get feedback for how people experienced their Fulbright grants and what they thought Fulbright needed to do better and what they thought Fulbright did really well. And of course, that all varies depending on where they were and who they are. So we wanted to gather some of that data. And so we created a survey, and it is not perfect, but we did get a lot of responses, and we're working on going through all of it right now, actually. And then the third thing is that we have expanded our team quite a lot. Like I said, it started out as the three of us who all have very similar experiences and backgrounds, and we decided that was not good enough, and that was not certainly representative of the LGBTQ experience, even within Fulbright. So we broadened our team to, I think we now have, I want to say maybe at least 10 people on our board who work with us and, you know, help us create content and community. And we've built such a wonderful team, and they're just amazing people to work with. So those are the three things that I personally am most proud of that Prism has done over the last few years.
Okay, yeah, so it's not only looking back, but also the survey, I guess, will be published or also available.
Yeah, we collected data from, you know, as many people as we could, and we advertised it in as many ways as we could. And certainly the other folks for the other Fulbright groups will have access to all of that. We're currently going through the qualitative data, so all of like the long and short answers, which is a little bit harder to go through instead of just raw numbers. But once we have it, we do plan to publish it, because I think that it can be useful not just for the people on this call, but also for Fulbright commissions across the globe, right? If we find that, you know, Fulbrighters in Taiwan are having a particularly negative experience in this one aspect of Fulbright, that's something that they can maybe do something with, right? So our goal is to use it and to disseminate it and help people kind of make some changes as necessary.
Okay, thank you. So Tyler, the screen is yours.
Hi, okay. So a few things that Fulbright Noir has done a year and a half ago, and I was thankful that I was able to attend this event. They had their inaugural conference, and I believe it was 3 days. I missed one because I had my evaluation at the end of the year for Fulbright, and that conference was just amazing. So there were Black grantees like from all throughout Europe there. And we just connected, and it was a really great, brave space where we could all share experiences and really plan like how we could make Fulbright like a more positive experience for us. And it was great to hear about other people's experiences within Western or Eastern Europe, especially. And it was just a beautiful event for all of us to just collaborate together. And during that event, the Black Book came up. And so I don't know if you all have seen the movie, The Green Book. And so that's based on a real like Black traveler's guide. And one of the founding mothers, well, actually all of them for that matter, they were thinking about how history tends to be, you know, whitewashed within like Hollywood like movies. But we also did want to create something similar to the Black Traveler's Guide for Black grantees abroad. So for example, where can I get my hair done, or where's like this Black friendly bar, you know? And so that was something that was created as well, where just Black grantees from all over. So it could be in an Andorra, like, oh, go to this place if you want authentic African food, or go to this place if you want authentic, you know, or if you want Southern food. So that was another thing that was great to see fully realized after brainstorming it. And right now, Fulbright Noir, we're just trying to figure out like how we can support the grantees who are kind of like stuck in limbo right now. Because I know for the Netherlands, at least, some of the ETAs have already arrived. And before, I think it was after they submitted their application and they were just waiting to hear back. We had a little meet and greet, and so that was nice, so that grantees who were thinking about going in their grants could just meet each other and, you know, just get start the preparations for the move. And what we really want to do right now is just figure out like, okay, how could we best support you, whether that be emotionally or even financially, through like sponsorship or even small stipends. Like if, for example, in the Netherlands, there's a huge biking culture here. And so we would love it if we would be able to provide a small stipend so that someone could purchase their bike. And so that they have something, and that's a cost that's eliminated for them. And yeah, so fundraising is like number one thing in our minds right now, as well as like a mentorship program, as Genesis was talking about, because there are grantees like myself who stayed in the Netherlands, and I know that there are other Black grantees who stayed in their host countries, and I think it would just be really great if incoming grantees could continue to use this as resources, and we just, yeah, that's.
Okay, Tyler, just a follow-up question, what Michaela said, where is it based? Because of course the bicycles sounded now very based in the Netherlands, but do you have chapters? Do you have sort of, where's your global outreach?
We do not have chapters, no. So I'm in the Netherlands and everyone else is in the US, just spread out. Okay. And so, yeah, we just try to, so primarily we coordinate based on US time since everyone's there. And so that's also just something that we are hoping to expand on, just our overall presence.
Okay, okay, good, great, thank you. Anyone else like to come in on future perspectives of their affinity groups? Yes, Than. Yeah.
I remember when we first started out, me and Amika, we had like very small goals. We just wanted to like showcase some narratives that, you know, we didn't personally see, and to celebrate achievements of Asian people abroad. And then as time went on, our goals kind of really grew, as like we realized that there's so many things that people wanted and needed. And so one thing that we've been pushing lately at Lotus is we've pushed, maybe you guys do this too, but we've been like kind of making this like end of the year goals, like what do we want our organization at the end of the year. And we've also been talking about what our organization has actually done. And I think we've been growing quite rapidly because we've been really branching into advocacy. That's really one of the big things that our organization has done. For example, we've been working on this Reinstating Fulbright China campaign, where we want to reinstate the program in China that was kind of taken away under the Trump administration, because we believe in like cross-cultural education as well as research. And then we're also working with Fulbright Salam in the future, hopefully, on talking about the Muslim communities in China that are currently being oppressed at the moment. And so our entire mission is really just sort of privileging, like taking our privilege and the fact that we have a platform to sort of, do that work of really trying to meet the demands of what our community needs and wants, but can't do on their own. And so, yeah. And I'm also hoping to do what Fulbright Latinx has done, which is sort of create this mentorship program, but that's still in the works because, as you all know, we're under COVID and people haven't been able to move. So that's a future plan, but it's something that we're hoping to do as well.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So service, support, advocacy, and I think that will resonate with some of the others who haven't spoken yet.
So it was really interesting to listen to all of you because I know for a fact that the upcoming plans are actually super great. For us, it's a little bit more difficult just because the Muslim community is, so we can't just like target one country, like everyone, but like, yeah, it's a little bit difficult to create like a mentorship or anything because the application process is different everywhere, even like the dates and sometimes even the requirements. But yeah, we're always trying to cooperate together, and Ramadan is coming up, which is in like a few months, so you can expect a lot of things from us there. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else want to come in on? No, so Miranda, I'll give back to you.
Yeah. I was just wondering, since we are here in Austria and we are being hosted by our lovely colleagues at Fulbright Austria, I was just wondering if anyone had any sort of insights on what resources Fulbright Austria could use to sort of select a more diverse pool of applicants to apply. And that can be based off your own experience or experiences of other people in your affinity groups. Just to sort of get more people of diverse backgrounds to apply for Fulbright here.
I mean, I can start, but I feel like other people probably have more to say about this. We've talked about this in our group meetings actually, about how Fulbright just needs to do more outreach in general to to not just like the Ivy League schools. Why aren't Fulbrighters being actively recruited from HBCUs? So that's definitely something that Fulbright Austria, I don't know how much actually control individual countries have versus the Fulbright program and in the US. I don't know exactly how that works, but I just know that when I was looking around in my Fulbright experience, the LGBTQ community in Fulbright is actually, I don't think necessarily underrepresented, at least not in Germany and at least not in my year. There are a good number of queer Fulbrighters out there. So I'll let everyone else speak to their specific communities because, Prism is here more for community building and resource collection, but I don't think that there's necessarily a pipeline issue for my community. So if anyone has specific ideas, feel free to jump in.
I don't know who was first, so anyone just jump in. Whoever clicks the fastest can go.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of what Michaela was saying about Fulbright needs to do better outreach. I've had several meetings with Fulbright where we were brainstorming like how could we make Fulbright more diverse and more inclusive, and outreach was the first thing, right? And so we even brought it down to the T of most of the people in my first cohort were from the East Coast, right? And so it's not that long of a flight to get to Europe from New York, Baltimore, you know, New England, that whole area. Whereas, you know, someone who's coming from California and Fulbright is only going to pay up to a certain amount for your ticket, they might already be deferred from applying simply because they can't come up with the extra money to pay for their flight. I know that with my commission, the person who interviewed me, she was my advisor at the time, she said when she was looking at essays and whatnot, she wouldn't even want to look at the name just to help her be like less biased. Just look at the content and make a decision from there, you know, first. And then obviously when you get to the interview, like you meet the person. I personally also, again, like Michaela said, like I definitely think it's just Fulbright that needs to do more outreach. But as a commission, I would ask myself, are as many communities being represented as possible, right? Instead of just kind of like, oh, is this diverse? Because I feel like with diversity, quickly we'll think, okay, there's someone who's kind of older, someone who's younger, okay, we have one Black person here, and then you get this very like scattered cohort. You know, I still get that feeling when I showed up to meet my cohort for the first time. It was a classic like, okay, affirmative action, it's just me and one other guy, you know, and then there's just one other person. And you can kind of see that that was the thought process. Whereas everyone is primarily from one racial or ethnic group, and then there's just like the other, and it was very obvious. So I think if you look at it from a standpoint, or as many people being represented as possible, you might naturally have a more diverse pool because you might tick off more boxes, I think.
So when I became an alumni ambassador, I thought, you know, we were going to target like our areas. I grew up in El Paso on the border of the US and Mexico, and I didn't hear about Fulbright until I was already almost done with my bachelor's degree. And the University of Texas at El Paso has only done, there's only one Fulbright that's been awarded, and it was in like the 90s. And so I was always curious, like, why wasn't there more outreach in my city, especially Matthew, get out of the marshmallows. Sorry. He takes advantage of me when I'm busy. But so I've really focused on putting the program out there, contacting department heads in the university and making sure that they know about the opportunity.
I think sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of things always fall on us or people, you know, people that share our community to really take the time out to reach back. I mean, it's the same thing in the State Department. You know, we're always trying to, well, I wouldn't say always, but there has been a bigger push to recruit more diverse foreign service officers. And, you know, me, myself, I kind of learned about the State Department by chance when I was in college, and I got lucky. But you really do have to, if you want it to be more diverse, you really do have to go back to your communities and sort of spread the word, sort of say. I'll go to Michaela because I think she had.
Yeah, so I think we've talked a lot about outreach, which I think is important, but I think that another aspect of the recruitment process really can be approached from sort of looking at the grantees that you have and your alumni that you have now, and like sort of cultivating these champions within the program, like within, like with, or encouraging these diverse voices already in the, like within the program, like as a commission and as Fulbright higher ups. I feel like creating an environment where Fulbrighters feel safe and feel accepted and feel like they are being valued as not just a token diversity, whatever that means, and where they feel safe to go back to their communities and say that they had a great experience with the program. Because I think the last thing that a commission would want would be for their, whether or not it's the fault of the commission or fault of anybody within the Fulbright program, the last thing that anybody would want would be for the grantee to go back home and say that they did not feel safe, they did not feel accepted within their communities, in their placement, in the Fulbright communities. So I think that is really important to prioritize, not just outreach and like, because like once you have these diverse Fulbrighters, like what do you do? Like you can't just like expect them, like throw them out in the deep end and expect them to survive or thrive in the community. Like you need to provide resources for them, and you need to provide them a network of like-minded individuals who can support them through this experience.
I just wanted to highlight Michaela's message about, you know, more trans Fulbrighters and making sure that safety is really put in the forefront. And I totally agree. I think there definitely has to be some, there's a little bit of legwork that the commissions have to do extra for certain communities to ensure safety, so that they have a positive experience here. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because I said something that was incorrect, which is that my community is not necessarily underrepresented. It is. I met a number of LGBTQ Fulbrighters in Germany, but the fact is, like, my experience was in Germany, which is a relatively safe place for people to be out. And the fact is that trans Fulbrighters are actually underrepresented. So I wanted to make that correction and that distinction. And I know that speaking with friends and people in Fulbright Prism community, trans Fulbrighters have not always been safe in the places that they've been placed by Fulbright. So I just wanted to make that clear and correct my previous mistake.
Thank you. I wasn't sure who's next. I'm sorry, y'all. Genesis, Tan, I don't know if you guys can get out.
I can hop in. Sorry, my internet is not great, so I exit out for a little bit. But I got the tail end of what Michaela was talking about, but I think something that's really important, again, it's sort of like the first step. We think, okay, once we have this diverse cohort, problem solved, everything's all set, we're good. And then once they get, you know, once our diverse cohorts get into the country, then there's no support for them while they're there. So if anything, honestly, these alumni groups are doing a lot of legwork that commissions, in my opinion, should be doing. Now we're here to support. That's what we're here to have a conversation about. But if we're looking for institutional change, mind you, a lot of us, these are unpaid positions. We're doing this out of the goodness of our hearts. And I think that commissions could be maybe incorporating this into their overall structure. But something else that I would add on to that is, if commissions also do the work of diversity within their own groups, so hiring diverse people within their own commission, that is a form of representation as well. That sends a huge message to people who are applying to that country. This isn't what necessarily my experience with Fulbright in particular, but I remember I worked for a, I don't know can everyone hear me? My internet's super slow. I'm gonna turn my camera off in case that is slowing things down. Hold on, can people hear me? Everyone's frozen on my end.
We can hear your voice.
Hear you. Okay, great. All right, amazing. So the one other thing I would say is that this wasn't my experience with Fulbright in particular, but I did work for a study abroad program that did a lot of work with regards to sort of advertising, social justice curriculum, really putting a push towards hiring women of color as professors. And all of those things actually encouraged students of color to apply, or other students from underrepresented backgrounds. And I remember in my experience, I was shocked. I was part of the planning behind all of that, behind those pushes. And I remember from one semester to another, we saw you know, maybe like a 12% population of students of color to a 50% student of color population in study abroad program. And that had to do, so essentially those resources were, that investment was put in first into the overall programming, and the students came after. So that's a particular strategy that could be used, where you make the investment first. You know what I mean? You don't wait for the people to buy in and then see what happens. It's like, no, you make the investment first, and then you see how people, how we respond to it, because we feel seen, we feel represented, we see somebody who's there is actually might be able to better understand where I'm coming from. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you. Arua?
Yeah, perfect, actually, because I wanted to say it's not only about the outreach. The outreach itself is very, very important, but we have to look at the system itself. We have to look at the people sitting in the board, and who is representing Fulbright outside. And that's where it starts. I come from a community in Austria where Fulbright actually would never, you know, talk to me in any way, like not even, like, it's even when I look at the pictures on the website and anything, I don't really know why I applied back then, because it's very clear from the image that is that I see from the outside that I just don't belong. The space is not mine to be there. And just a funny story, when I was at the very first EFDI event back then in Berlin in 2018, I think it was 2018. And we were talking about how we can change Fulbright and actually make it more accessible to people from marginalized communities. And I was sitting in the plane next to a young woman, and we started talking, and she was like, so I told her where I was, and she was like, oh, Fulbright, isn't that like a super exclusive elite, whatever organization? How did you come in? And I was like, that's actually not, but that's the image we're trying to change. But unfortunately, there hasn't been, like, I mean, there's a lot of things happening, but not enough. Like, and I'm very excited to witness that change.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I kind of want to harp back on what everyone else has been saying, and that I remember, I think I have a pretty good commission, but I remember on my grant when things would happen, you know, I remember my commission telling me, you know, don't, like, we're really overworked. If, you know, if you're going to message us for something very, very serious. And for me, as a grantee, I think Fulbright do this a lot, where we're like problem solvers. So we're very like energetic, ambitious, and we want to resolve issues on our own. So I would have some really major awful issues, and I would not reach to my commission, because I was like, well, they say come to us when it's really serious. And clearly this isn't, you know, clearly this is not so serious. I can solve this. I don't need to reach out to them. So part of like creating a culture where, you know, if it's one thing to increase the diversity of Fulbrighters, but it's another thing where, do we really want to send Fulbrighters to places where they will not be safe or will not be comfortable? Like, you can't, I can't in good faith advocate for that. You know, from my own experience, I wouldn't want that for anyone. So it's one thing commissions can really do is kind of create a space that, like, look, you can come to us, you know, if your bank is harassing you, you can come to talk to us about that issue. Like, that was a problem I had. And just sort of like, I think commissions also do this thing where sometimes, and maybe I'm wrong, but they kind of back up the institutions before they back up their Fulbrighters. And I think that that needs to change, that you need to protect your Fulbrighters, especially your Fulbrighters of color, because they're coming from a society where they're already marginalized into a culture where they might be even further marginalized. And maybe they're not very good at advocating for themselves. So you need to actually stand behind them. And that's like something that, you know, if someone did that for me, I would have been so grateful. That's like the one thing I would change if I was commissioned. And just starting from there, just like taking care of the Fulbrights that you do have, and then sort of like cultivating the space, I think, you know, it could just transform my entire experience for a group of people. And then they'll go back to America and they'll be like, I had this great experience. My commission was there for me, you know. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that. And I know that particularly resonates with Roberta and I, because we sit on the board of Fulbright Austria here. So I 100% agree, and I encourage everyone, if you see, hold the commissions accountable. If you see something or if you have suggestions, please, let them know, or tell people who are in your affinity group as well to do the same. So important. Tyler?
Sorry, I don't want to be redundant and repeat everything everyone else has said, but as everyone kept talking, I was just like, yes. But like everyone else said, in terms of making sure the board and the commission is also reflective of the cohort, because I was sitting here and I was thinking, it's like, I'm in the Netherlands, which is pretty homogenous as a country, right? A lot of people with blonde hair and blue eyes, and my commission looked the same way. I know that there was one American, and she was also queer, and so it was nice to have a different, perspective. But when, you're part of the decision making and it's a homogenous group, you might unconsciously or consciously still choose to select people who you identify with or relate to just because of, your race or your academic background. I had a meeting with Fulbright in my cohort my first year, and someone from within Fulbright, she had described it as like, she didn't agree with it, but just further this notion of Fulbright being male, pale, and Yale, right? And so this is all, like, I think this is the vision we probably all had. Like everyone else, like, I want to change that. And I remember, I think my first year during orientation, or maybe it was several months after, but we actually had a meeting like on imposter syndrome, right? And we talked about that, right? And just kind of like how, yeah, Fulbright's advertised as something that's only for like people who are affluent, people who are white, and people who went to Ivy League schools. And that's not the case. Maybe it was then, but it's not the case anymore. Just recognizing that you deserve to be here. And so I think something else that commissions and local boards could do is give the new diverse cohorts like that validation, right? Because they, like everyone else was saying, like they don't want to be the token, minority, right? Because I would say to myself, like, you deserve to be here, you deserve to be here. But in the back of my mind, I was still so shocked that I was able to like join this space, and I think it took me a while for me to like really believe that I should be there. So I agree with everyone else that like, yes, you have this diverse cohort, but it needs to definitely still be, there needs to be attention and care given to them. And it also needs to come from the board and commission itself.
Absolutely. No checking boxes. You got to do the work. Roberta, I know we
Okay. Yes, I'm definitely not male or Yale, but I'm pale. As my mother would say, I look like death warmed up, but it's a different matter. Okay, no, in a loving way. Yeah. So I just want to come in on some of the aspects here, because I think we're sometimes talking about structures and functions that sort of also serve a different purpose. And I think one in the aspect, for example, of the Fulbright board, it looks very different in different countries. In Austria, for example, because of the binational, and I think we haven't spoken about that, and I think we need to speak about that, even if we're here now in a kind of global platform because of the digital, it's binational. So there is sort of a lot of aspects of how the boards are made up, or how much support individual Fulbrighters have in the different countries, that are very much sort of determined by the space in which you're entering. And the Fulbright board, for example, in Austria is binational, as mentioned, but it's also then sort of appointments through, for example, in Austria, by the university conference for representing the universities and not the ministries. So sometimes, of course, the diversity takes on different forms. And I, for example, I'm at the University of Graz, that's in the southeast nook of Austria. And I, so for example, on the board, always want people to go to other places than Vienna. So my diversity issue is don't just think of Vienna as a destination, but I think what a lot of people said is also the structure of Fulbright. It has a long application process, and that sort of already excludes people, because I think, Tyler, you mentioned that in terms of just the flight. It's not just the flight, probably sometimes in financial, but just you have to plan ahead. And that's a privilege too. If you sort of can plan ahead and say, okay, I'm going to apply and it's going to take all that length till I know if I'm going to do that or not. So that's a different kind of privilege as well. And I think sort of, which Aru already said, it's also a different aspect if we're looking at it from the US side, because we from the Austrian Fulbright board, we are always looking for ways, how can we get the word out that people can also come to Austria? We want more applications, more diverse applications, but we are actually also just want more applications. And then we'll sort of look at those. And in terms of the Austrian cohorts, I think, oh, you already said it, it's seen as a privileged level. So many students say to me, regardless from where they're coming from, oh, I won't have a chance. I'm not going to try. I'm not good enough. And that's sort of across the sort of level. And it is, of course, also competitive, because like in Austria, we only get to see a certain group of students. By the time it reaches the board, it has already been pre-selected in terms of whatever sort of, usually the term quality, but we also know quality can be an exclusion. But sometimes it is also that it is something real in terms of the scholarship as well. So we always talk about inclusion and exclusion, and where I think Fulbright Austria and all the Fulbright commissions need more help is, at least from now, the Austrian perspective, the national perspective, is how to get to those US communities more. So we sort of talk to universities. I mean, Hermann can come in and talk a little more about that, but how do we get more of that, a broader base in general, that we as Fulbright do want that student, whoever that student is, in all sort of diversity issues here as well. And in terms of the individual ones, I think that's already mentioned too. Sometimes these countries that are unknown, like Ahua said, need to get to be known as a place where one can also go to. But I think it's really good to hear all these voices of where we perhaps can create that community as a whole, because we do also serve different functions. If I, for example, on the board represent the Austrian universities, that's sort of something where already a platform comes in and one establishes the ties and the communities on that level. So I think we have to think about more of these kind of platforms of supporting, of including, of creating more of outreach in a good way, that we're there for applications. And so we won't be able to change the long sort of leeway of these applications, but we can perhaps have these ambassadors. And Arua, and I'm wondering if the Fulbright website still doesn't talk to you because you're on it. so
I'm the only one.
Yeah, but I mean that's one. I mean, sorry. I just want to say that one of the pitches, if you like, to use a business term, is to say it's an individual that's applying, because Fulbright has had the tradition of saying it's not just that your professor nominates you, but you as an individual can apply. So of course, this sort of being the only one is also the individual, but of course it's also lonely. So Arua, what do you think?
No, I think first of all, I was talking about when did I apply? Like 4 years ago by now. So that was definitely not the case. And currently, I would say, I mean, as I said, there are some changes, but yeah, it's a little bit slow, but because like the outreach is missing and so on. But I think these are probably factors that everyone is working on.
Yeah,
working on it. Yes.
Yeah, But just to, I mean, this is not of interest to everyone else who's not Austrian, but one difficulty in the Austrian setting to get more diverse Austrian students to apply is the educational system, because we lose them actually already with 14, 15, when there's a divide in the educational system. And I think that's one of the difficulties where we as a country need to sort of look at that in terms of the educational setting. So just as a footnote. Okay, Hermann, you was saying the changes are there. So
I just want to mention that we're working on that, and as Roberta said, I think it's also part of the system we're having here in Austria with regard to the schools. So we will have to start a bit earlier, maybe than in the past, to get the name out what Fulbright Austria and Fulbright in general is doing. And we have the wonderful opportunity to have USDAs going in Austrian schools, talking about how life in the US is. And I think that will help too, because there's still this notion that as an Austrian, you cannot afford going to the US because it's expensive. And I think that's something we have to showcase, that it's possible. And the USDA is coming to Austria, speaking to Austrian kids in high schools. They are the change makers, I would say. And all the Fulbrighters coming from the US to Austria are the change makers for that. So we are working on that. But it's not my time to talk, it's your time. So I give back to you.
okay, Miranda, what do you think? Where do we move to? We have got so many ideas already.
Yeah, I want to be conscious of the time. I know there was a question. Well, first of all, I want to thank Michaela for putting in all these plugs. So hopefully people are reading the chat too. But there was a question about whether or not you can be an alumni ambassador, even though you're abroad. I actually don't know the answer to that question, but.
Oh,
I would. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I should have worded it differently. I was saying that I wish that you could be an alumni ambassador while still being abroad. I think it sucks that it's only if you're back in the US. And I know you say you want to be conscious of time, but since I'm speaking and it's just making me think of what I did want to say before. But when Roberta was saying how can we get more US perspective applicants to apply to Austria, but also just in Europe in general, I think, because the way that I look at Fulbright is like you have Americans going to other countries and like, just like, you know, they're throwing American culture and norms and values and all this at them, even though, you know, you're trying to make it your own and like highlight your individual experience as an American. But then conversely, you have people from other countries going to the US, and even if it wasn't their attention, they're just consuming American culture, values, norm, and this and this. And it's also just like one-dimensional. And I just think that the entire thing is very reflective, again, of the selection process and the overall recruitment process as well. Because you just have like, yeah, it doesn't seem like it's actually this platform where we're all supposed to be uniting, right? Because that was the reason why Fulbright was founded in the first place, to establish mutual understanding. But it really just looks as if it's just kind of like, yeah, just like the US just kind of like reaffirming its dominance, you know. But anyway, I would like to see that change as well.
I have a question that sort of Hermann might not be happy with, but I'm in American studies, and one of the issues that I sometimes see is that on the one hand, you have the exclusiveness of Fulbright, which of course, because as Tyler now also said, there's so many steps in getting it. So it's a club, an exclusive club once you're in it. But like me being in sort of a smaller sort of city, it makes sometimes more sense to just have an open discussion, that it might be sort of all US Americans, it might also be all sort of people that are interested in just talking about perhaps the issue of being Afro-European with others perhaps in the Club Noir. So how do you feel about this sort of including others, because of course that takes away some of the specific aspect of it? Where are the meeting points in terms of strengthening your individual communities, but taking away? But of course now this opens up a whole kind of worms, and we have to be conscious. Miranda is giving me this look. No, you're not. Sorry. Okay. Well, I'll open up the can and we can quickly close it again. But I think it's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to also see, I know there are quite a number of people listening in. So if anyone listening in, I think we might have time for 1 or 2 questions for people who are listening in, if you want to ask.
I think Valerie wanted to come in.
So for me, I was really, I took pictures of the Mexican side of my family because they're all much darker than I am. And when I shared Mexican culture, I was really specific to tell my students in Sarajevo that I was like Tex-Mex, you know, that it wasn't a fully authentic representation of the Latin community. And then also like expanding on the diversity of the Latin community was really important as well. For Fulbright families, because I've had such a difficulty finding Black, Mexican, Asian families who have participated in the Fulbright program, I'm bringing on guests who can speak to their unique life experience and the impact of travel so that hopefully more people will apply.
Thank you for that. Roberta, unless you have anything, I guess we can turn it over to Hermann. I don't see any questions coming in from the field.
Yeah,
So
it just seems that we'll have to continue this discussion. So.
I have one question to the groups here. We're talking about the selection process, the application process. I know there are people out there with special needs. How do you feel the application process opens up to them? In other words, how easy is it to apply if you're part of a community with, yeah.
It's difficult.
So I have a heart condition, and in the application, and Fulbright Access has mentioned this in other meetings I've been in, you have to answer a question that says like, are you physically able? And it's very hard to tackle that question. I just didn't mention my heart condition.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't even have a condition, but you have to do a physical. And I remember just thinking to myself, oh my God, what if I find out I have something that I never knew I had and I can't go my Fulbright? And I was like, and then there's also this section about mental health, which I think is also like something that people find really, really hard to address because that's so personal, and to like give someone that information and not knowing if it will be used against you. You know, that's something that's really difficult for a lot of people. And I would also have to say that I live in Europe, and it's not the most like accessible place.
I mean, I think that's one issue too, because we have actually had applications from students with special needs, and sometimes they were going to study something where the buildings where that would have been were not accessible. And I think that's one aspect, to me at least, in diversity. We have to sort of lower the thresholds, and then it would benefit everyone, and not just people coming in, but also the local communities that are excluded, and we don't even feel them sometimes, where we exclude and where we don't include. So I think that's a good point, because I think in Austria very often, especially in the older university buildings, they're not always accessible, or it takes much, much more effort. And it is also a financial aspect to it. So that's something I think we have been thinking about at Fulbright Austria, but it's something that we haven't made more accessible. We only know it's not always accessible.
And another question which I have to the group is, I mean, it's typical, you would ask it right now, but seeing the applications coming in and the people preparing for traveling to Austria, we see due to COVID many dropouts. I mean, we have the program open so that people can come, but under these conditions, travel is really difficult. The financial situation in your home country might also be really difficult. So several people drop out. What is your feeling regarding this? I mean, other ways to work around that for the future? This might not be the last pandemic, and I feel that we have to be prepared to manage things like that in the future. So what are your thoughts?
Sorry, could you just repeat the question? So the question about handling potential
Basically,
dropouts?
do you feel that the background people are coming from makes it difficult for them to come here during a time of a crisis, a pandemic? And in the future, if things like that happen, are there tools you would suggest to make sure that we don't experience such a dropout rate again?
Yes, I can't speak for everyone, but I definitely think that's a huge factor, right? So I can go abroad where there's a lockdown, or just, you know, I'm receiving this stipend, and, you know, it's just not really like a quality life. And what I have at home maybe might not be the best right now, but it's better than what is being offered to me. And so I think if I were going to be persuaded to go, I would definitely need more money, so more financial support, more emotional support. So whether that's just having like a bi-weekly check-in with the commission virtually, like a little like meet and greet, or like a pub quiz hour or something like that. And if I'm, well, this has nothing to do with you, but if I'm also being completely honest, I think it really sucks that the incoming grantees were given a choice to stay or to go, because it puts them in this position of like, I mean, I think we all ultimately know what the better answer is, which is stay home, right? You know, Europe and, you know, Asia and all these other places, they're not doing any better or any worse than the US and vice versa. So it's just kind of like, what do I do? I think if you're going to give options that are like, oh, stay or go, just make sure they're properly supported.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have to think about the time issue. So let's do the last two answers here, and then we will close the meeting.
Yeah, I think at least for the pandemic, I think a big issue of moving is that how long you're gonna move, right? If you're gonna move for 4 months, no one wants to uplift their life for 4 months in the setting. And I think you have to like really set up every possible resource, flights, where they're gonna live, like set it up for them to make it so that when they get there, they don't have to do all this work on their own, because it's so hard to do during this time period. Like it's almost impossible. I know, like I got a visa for Austria. That is so hard. That's the hardest visa I ever got in my entire life. I don't know if you've ever been to MA 35, but they're something. They really are. I've never experienced anything like that in my entire life. It's so difficult. So making those experiences easier for people would really entice them. And if they can't come, just like offering to, you know, maybe you can do courses online. We all have to do this. I have to take all my graduate courses online. That is my life now. And so in the future, if there was just this better transition of like, so you can't make it now, but you can still teach, you know, you can still be a part of it, you can still meet your colleagues, you can still sort of set it up so that if they do eventually come, their transition into this environment would be a lot smoother, just to make people's lives easier. And if that means that your work is harder, then that has to be the case.
Be assured that our work is hard, and we are working hard on that. So thank you for that comment. I really want to thank Dara for all the efforts she's putting into supporting the students coming here. And but this is well taken, so thank you for this. So there's the final answer before we have to close, unfortunately.
So I've talked to a few families who have had varying, just like the Fulbright program, right? Varying experiences as far as COVID. Some were able to stay, some were very much told they had to leave, or there would be no resources available to them. I think the thing that couples with this when we're not looking at a pandemic situation is also socioeconomic standing, right? I moved out of my house when I was 17, and I lived under the poverty line pretty much all the way up until the Fulbright program. And I've had to break a lease, and I went to Bosnia with $3,000 in debt. And then you look at everyone who got shuffled back to the US, they had already stopped their leases. They had to find housing accommodations. So there's so much logistical impact as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I just have to say, it's impressive what you all have as kind of gift for us to share. So all your answers are well taken by us. Also, board members are here who will make sure that we have to consider them. So thank you for the gift, all the members from the communities here, for the alum-led communities shared with us. This is really impressive. I also want to say that this wonderful product of the Fulbright grant, which we are seeing today, with all of you sharing your thoughts, sharing your dedication to the Fulbright program, is really, really well taken, and an important assurance that Fulbright changes lives, that the Fulbright experience produces change makers, and that's what you are as alum-led communities. So I want to applaud. And we have a lot of things to take back to the drawing table and to think about. And our blind spots need to be always in the focus. So please keep doing that. Show us our blind spots so that we can change the program for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Hermann. I just wanted to also say, add on to that, like, this is my first sort of official event I've done with Fulbright alumni, current students, and teaching assistants, anything with Fulbrighters. And I am so inspired by all of y'all. And I think I just wanted to also thank you because yes, I sit on the board, but I also am an employee of the Department of State. So I really value hearing you guys' experiences, and you do it pro bono. So thank you, Tyler. I want a copy of the Black Book for my own personal use. Yeah, if you guys have anything that you didn't get to mention during this session, please feel free to reach out to me personally and directly if you have any ideas, or if you have something you want to say to the State Department about your experience, or things, any way we can support you as well. Please get up with Hermann or Dara or Danae and get my contact info. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, from my side as well.
So, bye-bye.
Bye.